They say money doesn't buy happiness, but money can buy you a presidential suite on a luxury cruise. Debra Wolfowitz, a recently widowed millionaire who is trying to patch up a troubled relationship with her 17-year-old daughter, Haley.
Debra spares no expense on this trip. She wants to do whatever she can to make sure it's a good moment for her and Haley. Sure, they've been having some difficulties, but she's really hoping that if she shows Haley the best time of her life, things will be smoothed over.
But by the time the cruise liner returns to the docks, this upper-class mom will have a first-class ticket to the morgue. Debra Wolfowitz, a recently widowed millionaire who is trying to patch up a troubled relationship with her 17-year-old daughter, Haley. Born in Iowa, Debra would attend schools in New York State, earning 2 graduate degrees.
Her second master's degree was done in New York, and that's where she met Marvin Mitchell.
Marvin Mitchell owns 2 established jazz venues and a recording studio in New York. Marvin approaches Debra inside one of his bars.
It definitely wasn't love at first sight for these two. Marvin had to do a bit of work to win her over. They had some challenges they had to get past, including an age difference that could make things a little difficult sometimes.
After a few dates, Debra is charmed. Marvin and Debra become an item. 2 years later, the couple marry in a small private ceremony. While Marvin splits his time between his nightclubs and the recording studio, Debra puts her extensive education to good use. Well-educated Debra becomes a member of New York's elite, moving in high society circles. Her effortless ability to influence an audience during speaking engagements draws the attention of New York's movers and shakers. Her network grows.
Debra was an accomplished woman in her own rights. She was an amazing public speaker. She was an expert about the arts. There were many things that she showed talent in and a gift for.
Someday, her friends believe it will be Debra's time to make a run for office. It's often suggested that Debra take on an even greater role in planning a vision for the future of the city. But an addition to the family would put any of those plans on hold.
When Haley is born, Debra is 45 and Marvin is 57.
No one expects to be a new parent at that age, but they had lots of space in their lives for Haley, who they viewed as their miracle.
But unspeakable tragedy hits when Haley is only 11 years old.
When the family was vacationing in Portugal, Marvin suffered an aneurysm. He was rushed to hospital, but unfortunately, he didn't survive.
Everything changes between Debra and Haley once Haley's dad dies. The teenage years are difficult enough, but to have this tragedy take place as well just further complicates things.
Haley's entire adolescence is shaped by the tragedy of losing her father. Her grade point average is slipping, she's skipping class, and there's a shoplifting incident, and this is when they become known to police.
Like many young people, Haley loves social media. She built up this persona as being a pretty young woman with this wild streak. Unfortunately, her mother didn't know anything about this or about what she was doing online.
For Debra Wolfowitz, this trans-Pacific cruise is a final try to forge a bond between mother and daughter. Debra's attempt to mend fences with her daughter comes at a steep price.
Debra spares no expense on this trip. She wants to do whatever she can to make sure it's a good moment for her and Haley. Sure, they've been having some difficulties, but she's really hoping that if she shows Haley the best time of her life, things will be smoothed over.
Flying first class from New York to Brisbane, Australia, Debra and Haley rent a suite aboard a luxury cruise liner for a one-week cruise with stops in Oahu, Bora Bora, Tahiti, and Moorea.
This trip might be a little too expensive for most of us, but when it came to Debra, money was no object. She wanted to do whatever she could to repair the relationship between her and her daughter.
For the first 5 days of the cruise, Debra and Haley keep to themselves and seem to get along.
Two women traveling together alone on the other side of the world on a luxury cruise would make very appealing targets, especially if they draw attention to themselves.
Is Debra and Haley's wealthy lifestyle like an open invitation to someone looking to take advantage of unwary travelers? Haley uses every opportunity to take pictures of herself on the ship and post them to social media. Debra's sense of frustration with her daughter's self-absorbed ways grows. The night before the ship is scheduled to stop in Bora Bora, passengers see Haley and Debra arguing near the guest services desk.
Debra's cruise card is linked to her credit card, and it's maxed out and frozen, and that's what appears to have led to the argument.
Debra needs to ask for guest services to unlock her card so she can buy meals and drinks, shop, and gamble on the ship. After getting the cruise card unlocked, Debra and Haley spend time in one of the ship's restaurants. The same evening, a strange incident takes place at a dining room on another deck. One of the ship's chefs notices that a serving platter has gone missing.
It's an unusual thing to have happen on a cruise, but it's not so odd that it draws ship security's attention, at least not immediately.
The following day, after the ship has docked in Bora Bora. The crew is notified that 2 passengers are departing the cruise early, flying home from Bora Bora directly. They ask for a piece of luggage to be retrieved from their presidential suite. A crew member is sent to retrieve the luggage to bring dockside for those passengers. But what he discovers will rock the 150,000-ton vessel. Debra Wolfowitz, a recently widowed millionaire who is trying to patch up a troubled relationship with her 17-year-old daughter, Haley. After receiving her second graduate degree, Debra marries Marvin Mitchell. Marvin is 57 years old when they have Haley. Haley is only 11 years old when Marvin dies of an aneurysm while they vacation in Portugal. After Marvin's death, Debra and Haley will never be the same.
Despite all the money that Debra's invested in this cruise, her plan to repair the relationship with her daughter doesn't seem to be working.
The morning after this shoving match between Haley and Debra, the ship's concierge receives a phone call to deliver luggage to port. At this point, there's no direct connection between this request and the shoving match.
With the ship docked outside of Bora Bora and deboarding well underway, Guest Services receives an unusual request. 2 passengers have decided to fly home to America directly from Bora Bora. They have left their luggage in the suite to be brought ashore.
There are rules about getting off a cruise early if your destination is in America. But if you want to drop a fortune flying home from the islands of French Polynesia, you can. You just need to contact the cruise line.
The porter recognizes the piece of plastic as being part of each cabin's shower curtain. He's shocked to see it's covered in blood.
The crew calls the gendarmerie, which are the French law enforcement on Bora Bora, and asks them to come and inspect the luggage.
As soon as the gendarmes open the suitcase, their suspicions are confirmed in the most gruesome way.
As investigators prepare to open the suitcase, there's so much blood pooling up inside that it leaks on the floor.
What was discovered inside the suitcase was a blood-stained shower curtain covering the partially clothed body of a woman.
Someone has murdered Debra Wolfowitz and crammed her body into her own suitcase.
We have to be very cautious as investigators that we don't contaminate the crime scene with our own DNA and fingerprints as well. We are wearing our proper PPE as we go in there, but we are just making sure that that individual is deceased. And from there, we are going to leave the body in the suitcase to maintain the chain of custody and all of the evidence inside.
The person responsible for having the bag delivered to Bora Bora is likely a suspect. It doesn't take long for crew members to identify the body as Debra, and they realize that Haley is the second person assigned to her suite.
Haley's nowhere to be found on the ship, but the investigators don't know if she's a suspect or a victim. It might already be too late. Someone could have thrown Haley overboard in the night.
Crew members confirmed to investigators Haley Mitchell had contacted the cruise company from somewhere on the island to request the suitcase be delivered to her on land.
Now they know Haley is alive and on the island, so law enforcement decides to set a trap.
Local law enforcement bring a clean suitcase to port, hoping to use it as bait.
Since the crew has agreed to deliver the suitcase to Haley in the port, there's an opportunity to bring her in and question her, or rescue her from her captors.
But after a couple of hours, there's no sign of Haley. The ship has been docked in Bora Bora for 6 hours.
All of the passengers will soon be returning from their excursions in Bora Bora, all but the two who said they'd be flying home.
Meanwhile, ship's investigators look through Debra and Haley's suite, hoping to piece together what happened.
Once the removal of the body has been done, we look around the room and we will see a very gruesome scene. When you're going through the room, you're going to see blood splatter from the blunt force trauma that she received. But we certainly need to look for her personal identification issues. Did she have an itinerary of what she was doing on the cruise ship at the time? Did she have any pictures or a camera that might have stated where she was and who she was interacting with that day or day previously? Does she have a cell phone? What do any of those texts indicate to us? What do any of the phone calls that she's made recently or emails that she's been receiving? We would be looking through these things in the room.
Further investigation of Debra and Haley's suite shows signs of a struggle in the bed.
When the investigator finds a shard of blue stoneware in the bed, they recall an unrelated complaint registered the night before from kitchen staff.
It seemed like mischief, maybe even a prank. Why would someone steal a serving tray?
What we know so far is a woman is dead and her daughter is missing and presumed to be somewhere on the island of Bora Bora. An unknown man has stolen a platter from a buffet. Was the unknown male connected to Haley in some way? Was the second person flying home directly from Bora Bora, in fact, Debra? There are a lot of questions that remain unanswered at this point.
Debra Wolfowitz, a millionaire widow trying to reconnect with her teenage daughter on a 5-star trans-Pacific luxury cruise, is found stuffed in her own suitcase as her cruise ship is docked at Bora Bora.
Investigators have 2 suspects at this point. Debra's daughter, Haley, who they believe left the ship and is somewhere on the island, and a mysterious male who stole a stone fruit platter from the buffet in one of the ship's dining halls.
When I do a scene survey, we are looking for a weapon of sort or some sort of object.
Investigators need to locate the man who took the stone platter, which appears to have been used to murder Debra.
Who is this strange man? And why would he want to kill Debra? Is he still aboard the ship, or has he fled ashore?
Did this man abduct Haley Mitchell? Was she already dead? Or was she somehow connected to all of this?
Law enforcement needs to scour the island of Bora Bora before whoever killed Debra can find a way out of there. They might just save Haley's life if they can get to her in time. Bora Bora is the jewel of Tahiti. About 9,000 locals work to accommodate a never-ending stream of tourists to the island, which is located about 3,000 miles northeast of Australia.
250,000 people visit Bora Bora every year. Now, most of these visitors are concentrated in one village on the island where most of the resorts are. But if Haley is on the island, she could be anywhere.
Investigators need to determine if Haley is moving about of her own free will, and they need to act fast to track her down.
As the day draws to a close, passengers return from the day trip to the island. In addition to Haley Mitchell, one other passenger fails to arrive back on time.
This is when investigators find a potential piece of evidence.
Along with Haley, a man named Richard Cookie Levins is also missing from the ship's manifest of returning passengers.
At this point, all investigators know is that Richard Cookie Levins flew from New York to Brisbane in order to catch the cruise. Debra and Haley are also from New York, but they arrived on a different flight. They're from different parts of the city.
However, it's a coincidence that can't be ignored. Law enforcement requests a record check for Richard Cookie Levins from the International Criminal Police Organization, Interpol. While Cookie embarks on the cruise at a different port than Haley and Debra, he has now become a person of interest in Debra's murder.
The investigators have developed a theory that this Richard Cookie Levins has kidnapped Haley and forcibly brought her to the island. Perhaps Haley's phone call to pick up the body of poor Debra in the suitcase was coerced by Cookie Levins.
At this point, law enforcement are racing to find Haley Mitchell and Cookie Levins. They search all over the island, but there's no sign of them.
As the harried search continues around Bora Bora, passengers who were out all day come back to the ship. One passenger provides the investigation a piece of information that throws them for a loop.
With 3,000 people on the ship and 1,000 crew members, trying to piece together this investigation is going to be almost impossible.
One of the passengers remembers a confrontation between Debra and Haley that the ship's investigators hadn't heard about.
There's evidence that not all was rosy between Haley and Debra. This tourist leads the police to the concierge who broke up the fight between them.
Investigators discover the argument between Debra and Haley was not just about Debra's credit card. The charges on the card show what Haley had done with it.
This piece of information, the charges on Debra's maxed out credit card, puts her murder in a whole new light.
Not only was there another flight booked on Debra's credit card, but other expenses were also being charged, some on board the cruise ship itself without Debra's knowledge. Debra Wolfowitz, a millionaire socialite widow from New York, takes her 17-year-old daughter, Haley, halfway around the world for a trans-Pacific cruise. Unbeknownst to Debra, Haley has flown a man all the way from New York using her mother's credit card, charging tens of thousands of dollars. Haley Mitchell and Richard Cookie Levins remain at large on the island of Bora Bora. But as each moment passes, the odds of the two Americans sneaking aboard a boat or small airplane off the island become worse and worse.
Not only does law enforcement need to figure out what happened to Debra Wolfowitz, they need to find these two and get them into custody quickly.
Especially if Haley is in danger herself, there's a chance Haley Mitchell might not even be alive. Time is of the essence.
When passengers return from the day-long excursion to Bora Bora, investigators discover that Haley and Debra had a violent confrontation over Debra's credit card.
Debra had her credit card linked to her cruise card, which is used to buy everything on the ship. It would only be declined if the credit card was maxed out.
Debra's a millionaire with her life seemingly all together. She doesn't max out her credit cards.
Using the onboard Wi-Fi, Debra checks her credit card balance. Sure enough, investigators discover the credit card has been maxed out with some very large charges.
Haley has purchased a second cabin aboard the ship with her mother's credit card. There's also airfare purchased on the credit card, one first-class ticket. Haley had brought Cookie Levins aboard the ship using Debra's credit card, without Debra's knowledge.
law enforcement places a flag on Debra's other credit cards. If Cookie and Haley try to buy anything on the island of Bora Bora with a credit card, police will know in minutes.
A quick search of social media accounts confirms it. Richard Cookie Levins is Haley's boyfriend.
Haley has moved from person of interest to possible accomplice in Debra's murder. Haley and Cookie used Debra's credit card to pay for drinks on the island, a decision they will soon come to regret. Haley Mitchell and Richard Cookie Levins are arrested for the murder of Debra Wolfowitz the night after her bloody and broken body is discovered stuffed into her own suitcase. As the investigation continues, law enforcement uncovers evidence of a plot to kill Debra that would rock social media and make headlines around the world. Debra Wolfowitz, a recently widowed millionaire who is trying to patch up a troubled relationship with her 17-year-old daughter, Haley. Debra Wolfowitz has unwittingly paid for her daughter's boyfriend to join them on a 5-star luxury cruise.
An argument over money and a stolen serving platter connect daughter Haley and her boyfriend Cookie with Debra's murder.
It's always a bad move to use stolen credit cards. This was easily traced by the police.
With Haley and her boyfriend Cookie now in custody, law enforcement now needs to determine who actually killed Debra and what the motive for that was.
When Debra's body is examined, it's brutally obvious that her skull has been crushed. The examination also discovers shards of the serving platter that were suspected to have been used during the attack.
The human skull does a miraculous job at protecting our brain. That individual would have to receive significant blows for her to have sustained an unconscious state. And it's totally reasonable after that your murder weapon, if it was of a hard state, could actually break.
But coroners also discover signs of asphyxiation, bruises the size of small fingers around Debra's larynx.
The shower curtain shows evidence of having been ripped from the curtain rod, and Haley's fingerprints are all over it.
It's not easy to get a body in a suitcase, which is what Cookie discovered.
An examination of the victim's body reveals broken bones and a dislocated elbow and other severe injuries. And investigators don't believe Haley would have had the physical strength to be able to do that.
Clearly they were in this together, but why? Was it premeditated, or did Cookie get so furious at Debra's not wanting him on the ship that he decided he needed to do something about it?
Through the cooperative efforts of Interpol, Haley and Cookie's text message conversations are unlocked and reveal a sordid plot worthy of the tabloids.
These two have no respect for Debra. Their texts back and forth are heinous.
The text messages make it clear that Cookie and Haley conspired to kill Debra.
Haley and Debra's troubles far exceeded the death of her father.
Investigators discover that police responded to more than 24 domestic disturbance calls at Debra and Haley's home.
Haley had fallen in with a rough crowd with whom she'd connected on social media. And about a month before the cruise, Haley had told Debra that she was pregnant.
Law enforcement believe Debra and Cookie have never met prior to the night of her murder. Debra was incensed that Haley was pregnant with Cookie's child.
Haley Mitchell and Richard Cookie Levins are both charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder.
It was a classic case of he said, she said. Once they were both arrested, each of them blamed each other.
As the trial looms, law enforcement looks to sort who was the ringleader and who was the accomplice. Cookie Levins and Haley Mitchell are charged in the murder of Haley's mother, Debra. Now, in a French Polynesian court, Haley Mitchell and Cookie Levins each accuse the other of hatching the plot to murder Debra Wolfowitz.
Their stories don't match up. Haley says that Cookie killed Debra impulsively after Haley told him that Debra wanted them to get rid of their baby. But Cookie says it was the idea of millions of dollars of inheritance that drove his actions.
Forensic evidence submitted by the prosecution indicates they both took part in the murder. Cookie was seen stealing the platter. The small finger-sized bruises around Debra's neck indicate Haley's hands. And Cookie's strength would have been required to dispose of the body.
It would take a significant amount of force to be able to manipulate the body and bone structure in order to make it fold and fit inside a suitcase. And it would require more than one person to help fit an average-sized woman's body into a suitcase.
Text messages provided to the jury prove that Haley wanted her mother murdered. She was the one who dangled the idea of the millions of dollars of inheritance in front of Cookie and bought him the trip around the world using her mother's credit card. Under cross-examination, Haley does whatever she can to point the finger of blame back at the victim. She accuses her mother of being abusive, alcoholic, and schizophrenic, but these claims were quickly refuted by the text messages.
It's clear to the court that 17-year-old and pregnant Haley was an abusive wild child. She conscripted her boyfriend Cookie to help murder her mother. In fact, the damning chain of texts would only end after Debra is dead, and Cookie asks Haley for help in finishing off the job.
Haley becomes enraged at Cookie's inability to kill her mother, so she finishes the gruesome job herself. Afterwards, the two of them discuss how to dispose of the body. Haley Mitchell and Rashard Cookie Levins are both sentenced to life behind bars in a French Polynesian prison for murdering Haley's mother, Debra Wolfowitz. But the story doesn't end there. Just before her baby is born, U.S. authorities intercept a letter from Haley to Debra's sister in Iowa. Haley will give the baby up for adoption unless the family gives Haley the inheritance from Debra's estate.
The family agrees to put nearly $2 million in a trust fund for Haley's baby.
The fear now is, will Haley find a way to get access to that money before her child receives it?
Haley gives birth to her baby in prison. She also still uses her smartphone to communicate with the outside world, building her social media platform. If you can believe it, she actually has more followers than ever.